Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What They Don't Say. I'm your co-host, Shannon, and typically I'm sitting next to my lovely cousin, Lauren. However, she is not here today because she's a badass woman on a work trip in Washington, D.C. So it is just me and you guys today. Now, if you're new here, I would recommend going and checking out one of our more normal episodes where we're talking about topics such as sexual assault, rape, relationships, trauma, everything in between that. I would suggest checking out episode 4, 5, or 6. Those are definitely will give you a more normal idea of what our podcast is all about. Now, today, this is kind of a mini episode, and it's going to be something different. It's different for a few reasons. The first reason is it's just going to be me talking, as we've already established. The second reason is that I'm going to be zoning in on a very, very particular topic. What I'm going to be covering today is SANE exams, otherwise known as rape kits. A SANE exam stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner, but a lot of people know these sorts of examinations as rape kits. So this episode, just as a disclaimer, we normally don't give trigger warnings or disclaimers on here because we like to talk about things from an approachable manner. But at the end of the day, this topic is really fucking heavy. And there's really no way around it. I've been pretty nervous about this episode all day, partly because I'm recording by myself and partly because this is a topic that I think deserves a lot of respect. And it's a topic that is challenging to talk about, not only because it's incredibly emotional and triggering, but also because it's a topic that requires kind of a lot of medical knowledge, which is something that I don't have. So I'm going to be explaining what this exam is, why it's important, my experience with the exam. I'm going to walk you through every step of the exam itself. I have my medical report. I'm going to share a few photos. No photos are going to be incredibly gruesome or anything like that. But I do think that because I am somebody who does not have a medical background, I want to talk about this from the most informed way that I possibly can. So without further ado, I want you to settle in, take a deep breath, and we're going to get through this intense and very important topic together. Okay, so to start, what the hell is a SANE exam? What is a rape kit? Like, if you've never heard of that before, you're probably like, yeah, don't know what that is. I've never had one before. Trust me, you would know if you had one. But basically, it's a full examination of your body as well as a report of the actual sexual assault that you experienced, and usually takes place either right after being sexually assaulted or a few days afterwards. The point of the exam is to get as much medical information about you as possible in case you want to pursue legal action against your assailant. These exams are incredibly invasive, and the reason they are is because they don't want to leave any stone unturned. So this means that potentially, if you're going to the hospital right after being assaulted, you're about to get invaded a whole lot more once again. But it's for a very necessary purpose, because this is an incredibly big part of evidence that can be a key player if you end up going to trial. Now that we've talked about what one of these exams are, what getting a rape kit is, we're going to dive into my experience, and I'm going to give all of the deets about exactly how my exam was. Now, every exam might be a little bit different, especially depending on your state, obviously depending on, where you're going to get this exam. So this is just my experience, but I do think that generally they do have the same guidelines. They do have to do the same things. So that's we're just gonna dive in. It's gonna be okay. We're all gonna be okay. Starting off, I ended up being really incredibly lucky because I got my rape kit done almost immediately after being sexually assaulted. And I owe everything to one of the people that I called after being sexually assaulted. I didn't even really know what a rape kit was. I certainly wasn't in a very clear state of mind after being assaulted. So I didn't even think that I needed to go to the hospital. It wasn't until I called my friend and she said, look, if this happened to you, you need to go to the hospital. You need to get evidence in case you ever want to pursue any sort of legal action. So I called another friend who was in town at the time, and her and somebody else ended up picking me up and driving me to the hospital. So the first thing that happened when I walked in is my friends told the front desk people in the emergency room, and they said, hi, our friend here needs to get a rape kit done. And the first thing they asked me was, have you been hit or brutally beaten or choked at all? And my immediate response was, have I not been violated enough to get a rape kit done. And I frankly could barely respond with words. And I just said, no, I wasn't, but I was assaulted. Like, I was assaulted. And the next question they asked me was, what's my name and can I spell it for them? And I began spelling my name, and I got to S, and I got to H, and I got to A, and then I couldn't spell it anymore. That was it. And I've talked a lot about moments where the sexual assault felt really real, and that was definitely one of them. And I do think that me being unable to spell my name was a really big indicator of how not okay I was. But anyways, moving on from there, we waited for a few minutes in like the typical emergency room, or typical urgent care waiting room. And then pretty quickly they moved all three of us, me and my two friends, to a separate, really private waiting area. So it's literally just another room with, chairs, just like a waiting room, but it's private. So, there's not going to be any sort of other pedestrians in there. Pretty quickly, which I learned at around 12:35 a.m., the nurse who would be doing my exam came in. When the nurse first comes in, their job is to figure out who you are and ask you all the basic questions. What's your name? How old are you? What do you do for work? Where do you go to school? How much do you weigh? Those sorts of things. Are you safe in your home? And then they pretty quickly move into questions about the assault itself. So I'm going to be reading the exact questions that I was asked at this first portion of the exam. So, there's some history, there's my age, there's my weight, those sorts of things. And then a question that I didn't anticipate them asking me was, what was your most recent sexual contact prior to or since being assaulted? And was there a condom used? Now, it's incredibly important for them to ask this question because later on they're going to do DNA swabs. And if they are only expecting there to be DNA from your assailant, then it's going to be very confusing to them when multiple DNAs come back. And they're not going to know, okay, who was the assailant versus a consensual sexual partner. So I was asked that question. They also asked if there was a condom used with any previous partner. And then they start getting into questions about the assault. So these questions are, did a finger penetrate? Did penis penetrate? Did an object penetrate? Did an assailant ejaculate? What was the location of the ejaculation? Did an assailant wear a condom? Did assailant use lubricant? Did assailant put his or her mouth on your genitalia? Did the assailant put his or her mouth on any other parts of your body? Did assailant make you put your mouth on his or her genitalia? Did the assailant make you put your mouth on any parts of his or her body? Other details. These other details typically include strangulation, and this question is asked because a lot of people do not think about strangulation when repeating their assault. I learned that from the actual nurse who did my exam. When she testified in court, she talked a lot about that. So then the next set of questions that happen are things about what has happened after the assault. And I'm going to explain why that is in a moment. But these questions are, have you douched? Have you bathed or showered? Have you eaten? Have you drank? Have you smoked? Have you brushed your teeth? Have you gargled? Have you urinated? Have you defecated, which means shit? Have you used tampons, liners, or diapers? What clothes are you wearing? Are these the same clothes as before? Or are they different clothes? Now, these questions are all asked, once again, for DNA purposes. So if you go to the hospital and they're going to be collecting swabs of your mouth and your vaginal area and all over your body, and you've showered and you've brushed your teeth and you changed your clothes, then the chances of there being DNA from your assailant on you are significantly lowered. Now, obviously, internal DNA, so things like inside of your vagina or perhaps your anus or things like that, that DNA may stick around for a while. But if you've ever been assaulted, if you're assaulted and you are going to the hospital afterwards, I think it is absolutely apparent. This is my very professional opinion, but from actually a non-laughing standpoint, this is like what the medical professionals say. Do not brush your teeth. Try not to drink a whole lot of water. Try not to pee. Keep your underwear. Keep your clothes. You don't have to wear those clothes to the hospital, but it's important to have as much DNA as you possibly can. So like for me, I did pee after my assault. I did drink water after my assault, and I changed my underwear, but I brought the underwear that I had been assaulted, that I had been wearing right before the assault. I brought it with me to the hospital. Another weird thought that I had right before going to the hospital was, what do I wear when going to this exam? And it wasn't like a, let me look cute for this exam. It was simply a absolute shock of, I've never thought that I would have to get dressed for an occasion such as a rape kit. And I guess if you ever find yourself in that scenario, which I truly hope you do not, but if you do, the correct answer is wear the clothes that you were wearing right before you got assaulted. And if you don't have those clothes for whatever reason, then just wear something comfortable, because you're about to go through something that is incredibly uncomfortable. So the next thing that happens is you give a detailed account of the assault itself. So this is going to be what happened an hour before the assault, all the way to what happened after. So it's all those details. And the good news is they've already asked you those questions of, was there penile penetration? Was there penetration of an object? Did they touch this part of your body? So then once you're recounting your story, and they're writing all of this down, by the way, this is like not just questions for funsies, like they are writing all this down, they're documenting everything. Then they can ask you details about all of those questions that you had been asked before. Now you're giving the story behind them, and then they can ask details about those specific questions. So the next thing that happens is they give you your reporting options. Now, reporting options do vary state by state, so I'm only going to be talking about these specifically related to Colorado, and this was my experience. But in Colorado, we have 3 reporting options. The first one is anonymous reporting. So essentially what happens is they will collect the evidence, which means they will do an entire exam, but it does not get analyzed. There will be a phone call to law enforcement, and they will say, hey, look, we have an anonymous report about a sexual assault, and there will be a case number assigned to the evidence, but it will sit up to 2 years before being analyzed. Now, it's not analyzed automatically at the end of those 2 years. It is simply a thing of, if at any point within those 2 years you want to go through with the court trial, or you want the evidence to be analyzed, then it can be. But that's basically the best reporting option, in my opinion, for somebody who wants the evidence but has no idea whether they're ready or not to pursue a court case. So then on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have a full report. So this is a fully unrestricted report. Police will be called, law enforcement will come speak to you immediately. Evidence will be collected and analyzed immediately. And you're essentially saying, hey, I want to go through the justice process with this, but it's a very immediate thing. And then there's an option kind of in between the anonymous report as well as the full report, and that's a medical report. So the medical report, law enforcement will be called, there will be a case number given, and then evidence will be collected and analyzed, but the patient does not have to talk to any officers at that exact time. In the future, you can change your mind down the road and you can turn it into a full report and talk to an officer. Or you can choose to simply not speak to an officer at all. And the evidence will be analyzed, and law enforcement may or may not contact you depending on whether they find like a match for the DNA that was found within your evidence. So for me, I did a medical report. So essentially, they have my name, they have my information, and I didn't know, but I was heavily considering opening up an investigation at this point, and pursuing the trial process. But frankly, I was in such a fragile state of mind that I felt like I couldn't make that full decision until I was in a better mental space. So after they get all of the lovely details about your sexual assault experience, they take you into a completely separate room, and it is just you and the nurse. Up until this point, my friends had been sitting in that kind of secluded waiting room with me, but the medical exam itself is a whole different ballgame. So we went into this new room, and typically I would describe hospital rooms to be cold and uncomfortable, and the air is stale, and it's not a place that you would really want to chill and watch some Netflix. But this space felt incredibly warm. I remember on the door there was this sort of like glass stained window, and it was a very big room. And I just remember it feeling warm. There's a bathroom attached to it. There is all these machines and everything else that's in a normal sort of hospital examination room. But I just remember thinking that this isn't really the space that I would have thought it would have been in, which is a weird detail, but it's true. I just remember it being really, really warm. So the first thing that she did when I got in there is I sat on the table and she took a picture of me. And I will put the picture here. But this was another moment where I thought, do I smile in this picture? You're supposed to smile for pictures, but how are you supposed to look after being assaulted and they're, taking an account of your physical appearance? I would say that looking at this picture of myself, my eyes look not like themselves. My eyes look incredibly lifeless to me, and they look like they've been through something that they weren't ever prepared to be a part of. I forgot to say that before this picture was taken, when I was first brought into the room, the nurse did this thing where she was kind of orienting me. And I think this is probably true for a lot of nurses who do these exams, but I was particularly grateful to this woman for doing this. She wanted me to feel safe, and she did that by saying, this is a safe space. The door locks. It is just going to be you and me here. And then she described, what the exam was going to look like, what was going to happen next. And this entire goal of that is just to make you feel safe, especially after you felt so unsafe, and to really orient you and kind of where you are in space and time before this invasive exam takes place. So they take this picture, and now we are getting into the next part of the exam. So I went into the bathroom, I took all of my clothes off, and I left them on this little mat. It literally looked like a doggy mat, the type of mat that is put down when you have a puppy and they're going to pee everywhere. That's where I left all of my clothes, and I put on one of those hospital gowns. Now, this hospital gown wasn't like the papery ones. It was softer. It was a little bit more comfortable, I guess you could say, than the typical hospital gown that you would expect to be wearing. So then, she even marks things down such as, she is in the nurse, such as, she collected the underwear, she describes the underwear. Then she began distributing some medications to me. So I took a emergency contraceptive because my assailant did ejaculate inside of me, and I was not on birth control or anything like that. And there was no condom that was used. So I took an emergency contraceptive, but it's a little bit more powerful than Plan B. It's called Ella. And with that, I took a nausea medication as well as medication to combat chlamydia and gonorrhea. So at this point in my life, I'd never taken any antibiotics. And then all of a sudden, it was really like we're just gonna fucking load you up to make sure that you aren't getting any sort of sexually transmitted disease from this asshole. You're not gonna get a baby from this asshole, all of that. So the next part of this exam is called a head to toe exam. And essentially what this is a complete and utter close look at every part of your body. So they are looking in between your toes, on your wrist, behind your ear, all of these places. And they're specifically looking for any injuries or abnormalities. That's what they're looking for. And if there are any bruises, scratches, cuts, burns, marks, anything of that matter, if you, the victim / patient in this scenario, if you don't know where those came from, or if they weren't there prior to your assault, they will take a picture of them and they will document them on a diagram. Now, in my experience, on the nurse's laptop, she had a diagram of a body. In live time, she is documenting where is the bruise. Then she would take a picture of the bruise, and then she would take a picture of it with like a sort of ruler. And this is because it's really important to understand scale. So for me, I only had 2 small bruises on my leg. And frankly, I didn't know if they were from the assault or if they were there before. But she took a picture of them and she put them on a diagram. And she said, look, this is where there's a bruise. Patient is unsure where she got it. But long story short, they're incredibly thorough in this process because they want to make sure that they're not missing anything. So then she sort of begins doing these like neurological exams. These are things such as like how conscious is she, how oriented is she, is her eye opening normal, is her verbal responses normal, how's her motor response, those basic things, because it's very important to note how disoriented or oriented you are after being sexually assaulted. Following that, typical medical things such as respiratory, cardiac / vascular things, gastrointestinal, how's your bowel doing? How does your skin look? Does your skin look pale? Do you look hot? All of those sorts of things. So let's do a little time check-in. So I began talking to the nurse at 12:35 a.m. She got all that sort of initial information about, what happened during the assault and all of that around 1 a.m. It's time to begin the more formal part of the exam. This is called an anogenital exam. So what this exam is for me, and probably for most females that go through this, is, have you ever seen those sort of pregnancy videos? I've never watched anybody give birth, but you're on a hospital bed, you're laying down, and then your feet go in these sort of stirrups, and they go in these stirrups, and the nurse is sitting in between the stirrups. So if you're not watching this video, you're laying down, your feet are in the stirrups, they're apart, and the nurse is sitting in between your legs so that she can have a very clear view of your entire vaginal area. From there, they use this very tiny camera, and the camera is connected to a TV screen that is above my head, or the patient's head, I guess. And she begins doing a very in-depth examination of every part of my genital area. So this is areas such as the mons pubis, the clitoral hood, as well as the clitoris, your urethra, labia majora, labia minora, your hymen, your fossa navicularis, never even heard of that, the posterior fourchette, the perineum, the vagina, the cervix, anal area, and all of those sorts of things. Now, all of this needs to be looked at with a very clear camera, because there needs to be any sort of note if there's any damage to these things. So obviously everybody's genital area looks different, but there's sort of like a standard, and there's a difference between just having an abnormal labia minora as opposed to one that has been damaged. While she's taking pictures, she's writing notes. While doing all of that, she's explaining what she's doing. So it's not like she's just poking around in my cooch area and there's surprises. Like, she is explaining everything, and she's going slow, and she's explaining before, during, and after what just happened, what's going to happen next, what I'm about to experience physically, and all of that. And something that I thought was particularly incredible that happened to me during this examination was, I'm not saying I wasn't comfortable with my vaginal area at all before this exam, but I hadn't really spent a lot of time, looking down there. Not because I'm uncomfortable. It's just like I had never really taken a mirror and thought, what does my clitoris look like? So, I'm laying there, and I had felt disgusting after being assaulted. Like, I truly had wished that I could have ripped my skin off and put it in a washing machine and bleached it or burned it and gotten new skin. Like, I felt horrible. And so for someone to be, poking and prodding and wiping and taking pictures of that area that had just been violated, it was incredibly uncomfortable. And like I had said earlier, there's this TV screen above my head it is literally a live video camera of what the nurse is looking at. And I didn't want to look at it. So I was just kind of closing my eyes. I was trying to look around. And my nurse, in the middle of the exam, she says, "Hey, Shannon, look. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to look at my vagina with a high definition 4K camera, especially after being sexually assaulted." And I'm like, no, it's okay, nurse. I don't want to look. And she goes, "No, look how beautiful your body is. Look how incredible this is. Like, do you not understand how amazing this body part is and all that it does for you?" And I sat there and I looked. And my first thought was, holy shit, I need to shave my vagina. And my second thought was, yeah, it's gross looking and it's not the prettiest thing in the world. And it's just been so violated. But just because it's been so violated doesn't take away how incredible my body is and how incredible this body part is. And that moment for me was probably the first little peak of healing. And it's all thanks to that incredible, incredible nurse. So with the exam, getting back into it, there's a few things that she does. The nurse takes pictures, the nurse does swabs, the nurse notes any injury, and specifically with the swabs. So if you've ever had a pap smear before, basically they take this lovely metal tool called a speculum, and they go into your cooch and they spread it nice and wide. excuse me, and they take these big, long Q-tips and they go in and they swab your cervix. And in this case, what's different than a pap smear is they're swabbing like all sorts of like every little piece of your vagina because they're trying to get DNA evidence as well as, figuring out the state of your vagina. I remember the Q-tips, these sort of long Q-tips that she was, sticking inside of me, feeling incredibly sharp. And I've had a pap smear since this experience, which once again, a pap smear is very different than a rape kit. But I think the way that the Q-tips felt inside of me and how sharp they felt really speaks to how uncomfortable my genital area felt as a whole. A hole is in W-H-O-L-E, not H-O-L-E. Oh, also that camera that they use, it's called a colposcope. So that's kind of interesting. For me, something that I was worried about was that there wouldn't be any injury to any part of my genital area. And now that's a weird thing to say because, you might be thinking, Shannon, why would you want there to be injury? And I wanted there to be injury because, like I was saying, my vaginal area felt incredibly, incredibly uncomfortable. It felt stretched out. It felt worn out. It felt uncomfortable, like it had never felt before. And I felt like it deserved to be injured. Like the way that I felt emotionally and physically, I thought, well, surely there's damage to something. And that wasn't the case. There was no injury found, no tearing, no scarring, no scratches. The only thing that they did find was the ejaculation inside of my little vaginal pouch, the walls of it. And, I had mentioned earlier that my nurse told me to look at my vagina and it felt so disgusting, but the same way it was a little bit healing. Well, when she finally found the area where the cum was, she told me to look again. And she said, look, do you know what this white stuff is? And I said, no. And she said, this is your assailant's ejaculation. And I was like, wow, I don't ever need to look at that ever again. That's fucking awful. Why? I don't need to see that. And she was like, no. You don't understand. This is like full DNA proof. Like there is no doubt that this is going to match his DNA. And a part of me, is saying that's just so awful. And the other part of me thought, this is a win. This is a win for whatever court case I pursue or whatever I don't pursue. This is proof that I went through this. But back to this whole evidence thing, there being no sort of tears, no damage. The nurse that did my examination, when she testified in court, a lot of the defense's questions were related to, well, there is no injury, so it can't be sexual assault. And what she said, and what I want everybody to hear loud and clear, is that it is incredibly more common for there not to be any injury when doing a medical exam from a sexual assault than it is for there to be injury. Meaning that more people who have these exams who have been sexually assaulted show no signs of injury, that it's completely normal. So if you have one of these exams, not having an injury does not mean you weren't assaulted. And that's okay. And one of the reasons behind that, which she spoke about in court and in her testimony, is that the vagina has this natural way of lubricating, and it will lubricate whether you're being assaulted or not, whether you're turned on or not. And I'm sure women out there, you can relate to this. There's been times where you are, wet during sexual intercourse, but you're not turned on at all, or you're not wet at all and you're so turned on. And it's the exact same thing here, is that the brain to cooch connection, I would call it, is a pretty separate one. So for me, it seems as though my vagina produced its own lubricant because pop-off queen, that's what cooches do. That's what they're designed to do. And that's one of the main reasons why there was no injury. And finally, it ends. So the exam itself can take anywhere from 20 minutes to several hours. And that really depends on sort of what they find. So if you have hundreds of bruises on your body and scratches and scrapes and all of this stuff, it's going to take significantly longer to document each and every one of those, to take a picture of every one of those next to a ruler. And like for me, my exam took a little bit longer because my cervix, I guess, was really hard to find. She's just kind of hidden. She's like playing hide and go seek all the time. Before I left the hospital, I was given a few things. I was given this little folder, and it had a purple pamphlet in it that talked about things to expect after being sexually assaulted. And those were emotions, as well as timelines, as well as resources. And I was also told that it's incredibly important to go to a gynecologist following this up a few weeks after to make sure that I really didn't get STIs, to check in on all of my body physically and everything like that. So some of the things from the pamphlet I would like to talk about a bit. So they give this advice for caring for yourself. This isn't the exact words from the pamphlet, but these are things that were written in my medical report, which I believe are incredibly similar to the pamphlet. So they have this thing about caring for yourself. And it says, surviving a sexual assault can be very painful and an upsetting experience. You should not be surprised if your emotions feel like a roller coaster ride. These are some common feelings and reactions that you may experience. Rage, sense of loss, withdrawal, numbness or emptiness, loss of control, panic, stomach or headache pains, nightmares, reluctance to go to work or school, wondering why me, disbelief, difficulty sleeping, fear, shame, guilt, anger, betrayal, inability to concentrate. And then it goes on to say, all these feelings are normal. It's important that you have support to help you express and deal with these feelings. Don't be afraid to talk to someone about your feelings and experiences, particularly with someone trained in these issues of sexual assault and rape. With time, support, and understanding, these feelings will subside. It talks about breathing, that when you get scared, you should try to breathe normally because you often don't want to breathe normally, and your body's natural reaction is not to take a deep breath. The next one I really like. It says, appreciate yourself and the strength you've showed for having survived. I have a really hard time when people call me a survivor. I also have a really hard time when people call me a victim. And I think it's because I haven't found the right term that really replicates how I feel being someone who has been sexually assaulted. But this line of appreciate yourself and the strength you have showed for having survived, I think is a very powerful one because you made it through. You were in this time and someone was overpowering you and taking your body and turning it into something for their own pleasure and not thinking about you and your ability to consent or not to consent. And it ended and you're still here. And that is something to be celebrated and recognized and not something to take lightly. So when I walked out of the hospital that night, I didn't pay any money. I walked out. I left. My friends took me home. However, a few months later, in the mail, I received an invoice for $5,903.80. That's a lot of money. And that's how much my rape kit was. And I was told there was a way to get it taken, or my understanding was that I could get that entire fee paid for by insurance. And ultimately, insurance ended up paying about $2,000 of it. So I paid a little bit over $3,000 for this medical exam. That cost is exceptionally high. However, knowing that it's such an expensive process, I do not think that should hinder you from going to do it. Frankly, you don't have to pay when you leave the hospital. It's a later problem. And you know what is a now problem after you've been assaulted? Is making sure that you're prepared for whatever your next steps end up being. So do not let the financial potential issue outweigh the potential gain from getting all of this evidence. Now, with that being said, in episode 7, we dove into a lot of statistics as well as new laws that have been passed and some resources for you guys. And I would check the laws in your state because rape kits might be free in your state. They might be significantly cheaper depending on where you go, maybe in urgent care versus an actual center where all they do is these sorts of exams. It might be more affordable. I'm not exactly sure, but hear me out when I say do not let the cost of this outweigh. Do not look at cost as even a factor here. Like that is not it. this just is not about the money. And I do believe that rape kits should be accessible for everybody everywhere for free or at a very, very low price. And that's not where we are. And it makes me sad that that's not where we are. But just keep in mind that this exam is so important and can play such a key part if you decide to go through a trial process or anything along those lines. But at approximately 3:02, I left the hospital. And then my friends drove me home. And truthfully, what I want to say about all of this is the process is so invasive. It is poking and prodding in areas that feel so painful already. It is pictures of your body. It is literally stripping down and showing a stranger what someone has just completely taken over and violated. And if somebody were to ask me, was it worth it? I would say abso-fucking-lutely it was. And it's not worth it because I've felt better after leaving the hospital. It's not worth it because I can look at myself and think, wow, I did that hard thing. It's worth it because when I went to court, I had evidence to back up what I had said. And not just the medical evidence. You know, one of the key things here is it's not just the swabs and the DNA stuff. It's the recount of my story. That it is, you know, that is the first written down account of my sexual assault. That is a detailed account taken, you know, written down by a medical professional. You know, this isn't a friend, and I'm not saying that telling a friend isn't important. I'm just saying that if you are sexually assaulted and you have the opportunity to go to the hospital afterwards, go to the hospital. And you should bring your underwear that you were wearing before you were assaulted, and you should bring your clothes, and you should tell your story the way that it happened. And it is so painful to go through it all again, especially right after, when you yourself might not even understand what had just happened. But that can save your entire court case. And that can be the reason that someone else ends up in jail and that justice takes place for what happened to you. At the end of the day, it's totally worth it. And I'm so glad that I did it because I truly believe that my assailant wouldn't be behind bars if it wasn't for that. And I'm so grateful to my friend that encouraged me to do that. And if you're a friend who gets a phone call in the middle of the night and someone says, hey, I think I was assaulted, I don't know what to do, say, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'm going to pick you up and we're going to go to the hospital. And it's going to be so awful, but it's going to be so worth it because that son of a bitch doesn't deserve to walk around free. That son of a bitch deserves to be put behind bars for what he did to you because assault isn't okay and we should stop acting like it is. Oh, heavens, I am heated. I'm going to be honest, guys. I don't really have one clear thought to leave you with. My few thoughts are, if you or somebody you know gets assaulted, go to the hospital, take your friend or family member to the hospital, encourage them to do that if this has happened. And the next thing would be understand that it's a very intense examination. It can be anywhere from 2.5 hours long to 5 hours long. For me, you know, it was like about 2.5. I know for Chanel Miller, it was much longer than that. But the process does end, and it can have a profound effect on a court case. And that's a big fucking deal. I'm feeling a little bit wiped. I'm feeling tired. I feel like this episode was really heavy, and I thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I don't even really know what to say. If you have gone through one of these exams, I'm so sorry, but honestly, I want to say the biggest thank you on this planet to my nurse examiner. I don't really cry a lot when I think about being sexually assaulted or when I talk about it. But when I think about the nurse who did this exam for me, I want to cry. And when she walked into the courtroom to testify, I could not hold it together. I was bawling because there was a part of me that felt like that night, that nurse saved my life. Not because I was going to kill myself or anything, but because she gave me power back. She sat there and she told me to look at this part of me that had just been violated and recognize it for the value that it has, not the value that it has because somebody stomped on it and somebody wrecked it and somebody violated it. She reminded me of the value that I have as a woman. She collected that evidence, and in turn, this asshole was convicted. All these things. And so it just feels like she kind of saved my life. And if you're a nurse out there, my God, you do these exams. I cannot imagine what you have seen. I cannot imagine how painful it is to have hundreds of these every month and to hear all of these stories. But I am so incredibly grateful for you, grateful to you, because my God, this justice system is so broken. And if you weren't doing that awful, tireless, thankless work, I can't even imagine how low the conviction rate would be, considering it's already so low. Thank you so much to anybody who's ever played a part in any of these rape kits. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you found a way to enjoy this episode. If you want to share your story, if you have any questions or comments about the show, send an email to whattheydon'tsay@gmail.com. We appreciate you. We love you. And it's going to be okay. And that's about all I have to say. Catch you on the flip side. Cheers.